Goeienaand, dit is Vrydag aand, die 22ste Maart en ons gaan aan met The Long Lost Grave. See you later. Rob shut the car door and casually waved Herbie on. The BMW drive off along the dirt road back to the tent camp, while Rob and Kathy scampered barefoot over the sharp stones and up on the stoep of her rondavel. Still in the uncomfortable, warm and dripping wetsuits, they grinned at each other a little uneasily. We better get out of these wet things, Rob said, and pulled the zip of his wetsuit top open. Then you must dress, have a little coffee and be off to see a doctor. She shook her head ostentatiously, throwing her disheveled hair back over her shoulders. I don't need a doctor, Rob. All I need is a hot shower, a strong brandy, and companionship, if you don't mind. She looked him defiantly in the eyes. There is absolutely nothing wrong with me. He realized it was futile to insist. He changed tactics. Okay, you will have the shower and the brandy, and then we'll decide, right? And when he saw the compromise in her eyes, he smiled and stepped forward with satisfaction. Now, let me help you out of that wetsuit. Rob discarded his own wetsuit and went into the small lounge. He quickly gulped down a strong brandy as a bracer before mixing 2 proper drinks, one for each of them. He could hear the shower running in the bathroom. With a jolt, he saw her body torn and ripped to pieces by a monstrous shark, and he shivered violently. He gulped down another brandy. It was so close, and all because of some sneaky, hideous deed. He roused emotions of love and concern. The near fatal encounter with the sharks made him walk into the steam-filled bathroom. He stopped in front of the running shower, and she saw him. She stood with her back to him, and for moments she stared over her shoulder with wide eyes. Then she smiled and turned around, her hands reaching for him. Rob came into the shower, encircling her with his arms and pressed his face into her neck. They clung to each other wordlessly, the hot water spilling over and running down their smooth bodies. They stared into each other's eyes, reading the mutual need. Rob lifted her in his strong arms and carried her to the bedroom. Still wet from the shower, he gently laid her down on the large bed and sank down beside her. It was some time later, exhausted and tired, with Kathy tightly snuggling beside him, that Rob lifted his head and craned his neck towards her. He stared down into her soft grey-blue eyes. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, she replied with tears filling her eyes. Herbie glanced up in surprise when the two sauntered hand in hand into the tent camp an hour or so later, looking so happy and content that he watched them with suspicion. Hey, fellows, he greeted over a beer, clasping in one fist. Thought you said you were taking her to the doctor. Right you are, mate. We are on our way, Rob grinned. Just wanted to get into some decent clothes and then we're off. I would think so, he agreed dryly as he watched Rob, still in his swimsuit. He turned a scrutinizing gaze at Kathy, who blushed and fumbled with her hair. Something wrong with me? She asked hesitantly. I must say, you certainly don't look bad. Thanks, but the feathers certainly make the bird. Herbie chuckled. Now, that's not true. But what I really mean is you don't look sick or in need of a doctor. The two of you looked so good when you arrived that it's hard to believe that you've just had a close encounter. Kathy turned pink. Well, we had a few brandies, she explained quickly and added, and we talked a little. But I agree, I don't need a doctor, but Rob is very persistent that I should see one just to be on the safe side. Herbie nodded understandingly, although a faint grin on his face belied this. So would I, and I've been in this position after all. A merry grin creased his features as he leaned forward conspiratorially. The day, I must tell you what he said on the day of our arrival. Herbie thumped over his shoulder towards the tent. Do you remember when we met you with the broken down pickup? And Kathy nodded, relieved that the attention had shifted away from her. And what did he say? She asked curiously, remembering the encounter. Herbie hastily glanced over his shoulder. No, he said, as Rob appeared in fresh jeans and a short-sleeved shirt. Some other time. And why not now? She queried. Why not what? Rob suspiciously demanded as he noticed the twinkle in Herbie's eyes and the eager curiosity in hers. He immediately suspected dirty play. Oh, something about what you said just after you had played that dirty trick on me on the day of your arrival, Kathy answered innocently. Oh, that, he said, looking at them. And I didn't lie. So what did you say? That I was going to marry you. At the landing in the river mouth, Gabby Wilson pushed the dinghy into the water. He had a bottle of fine white horse whiskey for old Jos. Klaus was driving his Ford recovery truck down the main street when he saw a familiar figure emerging from the doctor's clinic. He hastily stepped on the brakes, slowing the truck, and peered at the figures with a feeling of uneasiness. Could it be? And with a flare of disbelief, he recognized Kathy, her hair flying in the breeze. He was assaulted by an intense feeling of jealousy and anger. He clenched the steering wheel with such force that his knuckles turned white. Bastard, he snarled. That bastard, I will kill him. All the humiliation he felt, the fact that Kathy had shown him the door, came boiling back. The Ford accelerated with a mighty roar as Klaus gunned it towards the Beacon Island Hotel. He took the elevator to the 5th floor and hammered on the door of Gordon Forbes's suite, and left half an hour later with a smug smile. He would show them. Chapter 8. There was only a silver moon in the starry night sky. A faint sea breeze was moving along with the regular motion of the waves, the only movement, and the roar of the crashing breakers on the rocks, the only sound in the otherwise quiet night. The whole world was asleep and at peace, and so it seemed during these early hours at the Storms River station of the Department of Nature Conservation, where even the forests appeared to be sleeping. Nothing stirred or moved about the station and camp, and except for the pounding waves, there was nothing to hold anyone's attention. Well, almost nothing. The Flying Dutchman was adrift, freed from the stout 4-foot anchor which had retained her so dutiful and unfailingly during the years and the last couple of days. The sturdy old fishing boat slowly drifted with the swells and current towards the rocky shore. Each consecutive swell carried the drifting boat closer to the rocks and violent breakers. Each swell became higher as it neared the shore and shallow water, and the wave rose up until it towered above the rocks before the crest tumbled forward in a roaring, plunging breaker that bashed into and over the rocks with an immense force, and the old boat was drifting closer and closer to the death trap of rocks and breaking waves. Lying fast asleep on his bunk in the tiny saloon, old Jos Visagie was unaware and unsuspecting of the imminent danger. He had stayed up late the previous evening, reading through the latest edition of the fishing magazine, and had consumed a considerable amount of whiskey in the process. Maybe that was the reason why he didn't wake when the tucking of the bow on the anchor rope had ceased, and also why the increasing rolling motion of the drifting boat was not felt by the snoring old man. Jos slept fully dressed, lying on his back. A thin shaft of bleak moon and starlight fell through the crudely made porthole, and as the boat turned as it drifted, so the shaft of light moved through the saloon, until it fell over Jos's jaunt, sleeping face. With his mouth wide open, he looked vaguely weird and deathly. As the height of the waves increased closer to shore, the boat was carried faster and faster along until it slid into the through behind. Tide and fate had finally caught up with him. Broadsided before the enormous wave, the Flying Dutchman keeled over sharply, and the shotgun fell from the bulkhead where it was propped. It clattered noisily on the deck, and Jos's eyes flew open. He stared straight in the shaft of moon and starlight and fell through the porthole. Alarm flashed through him like an electrical shock. The boat had turned. He heard the roaring of the pounding waves and felt the quivering, keeling deck. Adrift! Oh gosh, the rocks! Realization rocked through his very old body, and Jos lurched for the door. He burst through it onto the carrying deck and stopped dead in his tracks, clutching at the mast for support with one hand, and his mouth gaped open in astonishment. Time stood still. The wave towered above the boat, dwarfing its 35-foot into insignificance. Shocked beyond his wit, Jos stared at the wall of dark water that rose above them, or above him. In his distress, he saw the faint droplets as the crest began to crumble, and, as if by itself, his head whipped to the shore side of the boat, and he was aghast. Bare black rock loomed in half-light of the night. In the foamy boiling water, he could see barnacles on the submerged rocks as it appeared in the backwash. Hypnotized, unable to move, Jos felt the deck tilting beneath him, and he was slipping and sliding across the deck towards the boiling white water. Slowly, as if in slow motion, he saw the two-cylinder diesel topping over with a thunderous crash that was drowned by his own terrified scream as the boat went over. A yellow diving cylinder rolled to the dipping gunwale. He saw the gunwale on the lee side sinking in and under the foamy white water. No one heard his agonized scream as he slipped in the seawater. Jos knew he was a dead man. The last thing he ever thought of was a crazy, squawking albatross, and all went back as he sucked under the surface of the breaker, plunged the Flying Dutchman on the deadly rocks. With a vicious crack and rang out like a cannon shot, the old boat struck the rocks midships on its beam, crushing her as the enormous breaker viciously exploded over her, breaking her in two. And when the wash ran back from the rocks into the drawback of the throw, all that remained was crazily rolling forepart, its mast and saloon gone, the bow pointing at the sky. Broken and shattered hull planks littered the sea. The next wave came rolling in, crashing down on the remaining pieces of wreckage before slamming into and over the huge rocks ashore in its never-ending continuation. For the rest of that night, the waves crashed unrelentingly, grinding it to pieces. By morning, there was nothing left. Only a few ragged pieces of driftwood and darbies littered the rocks. The Flying Dutchman and old Jos Visagie had gone to Davy Jones's locker. They had lived and died at sea, like so many others. So vanaand se voorlesing is so 'n bietjie korter hier oor die lang naweek. Ek sal maandag weer aangaan met The Long Lost Grave. Dankie vir jou ondersteuning en laat jy die video's kyk. Jy moet 'n lekker naweek verder hê.